I was called to diagnose this vehicle. There is K5 2024, and whenever you turn on the key, it only turn on the accessory. It's not able to turn on the key itself. It tells you to step on the brake, you step on it, and it's not turning on the key itself. So what I'm going to do is, it's an accident vehicle, so I'm now going to check for power to the power from the BCM. So I'll do a little bit research on it and bring you guys along, and we learn something from this. So when you scan it, you are able to enter into some modules. Let me put the ignition, the accessory on. So it's able to turn accessory on, and let me scan some of the modules. So it's able to communicate with some of the modules, but not all of them. Let me check my fault code. These are related fault code: lane keep assist and vehicle speed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start testing my fuses and see. But for my main test, I think I'll go to the BCM, which they call integrated body control module, to check if I'm having enough communication there. Then from there, I'll test where the wire goes to the relay, the ignition relay, or maybe I'll go and find for the ignition relay and energize it. But normally these vehicles, I know their ignition relay is integrated into the BCM, so it's not something you can take the relay out and replace. So I'll do all those checks and see why I'm not able to get ignition turning on this vehicle. And this is how I came to meet it, because it's an accident vehicle and they are now fixing it. So with this one, what I'll do is I'll check all the fuses, because those are the main components which can affect the ignition. So let me test my test light, and the test light turns on, and I can see, I think the fuse to the alternator is blown, but that one is not an issue. Now the main focus is for the vehicle to start, and because the ignition is not turning, it's not turning on, so some of the fuses are not going to turn on. So let me check the ones that can turn on, then from there I'll know. So the ones that are not turning on will be because the ignition is not on. So with this particular fuse is the PCB fuse block. So this is the PCB fuse block. So let me check all. And normally the IBU is the one that has to send the signal to the relay in this box to turn on. So if it doesn't send a signal, it will not turn on. So for now, what I'm doing is, let me check the fuses. If the fuses are okay, there are some ignition fuses that I have to check. If all of them two are okay, but for now I'm just testing the ones that work. Let me see if one leg will turn on, the other leg will not turn on, and then from there I'll know that, oh, my fuse, a particular fuse is blown. But with the look of things, everything looks okay, and even the internal fuses doesn't look like they are blown, or any of them is blown, which is this one, which contains the ignition fuse one. So if you check from here, there is the ignition fuse 1, 40 amps, ignition 1 fuse 40 amps, and ignition 2 30 amps. And from the look of things, it doesn't look like they are blown. So now what I'm going to do is, I'll take you guys through the wiring diagram from the research. Take you guys through the wiring diagram, how I went about it. So it's either I remove this and check the wire that the body control module send signal to activate the relay in this. So I think let me remove it and bring you guys back. So there's the fuse, the PCB fuse that I've taken out. So what I'll do is I'll find for the exact ignition wire, then I'll test it and see. So so let's go to the wiring diagram, then we know the exact position, then we'll test it from here and see if we get any issue. But if it's able to activate it, then that means our problem is from the BCM. Then you have to go and check continuity from the BCM at the passenger side to this. Maybe because of the accident some wire got broken and they amend it with their own way. So I'll do that and bring you guys along. So this is the body control module. So I'm now coming to test the ignition relay. So what I'll do is I'll tape it. It looks like someone has been here. So what I'll do is I'll probe it and see if the relay, or let me say if I press the ignition, the relay will activate. Then from there I know where to go next. So this is the wiring diagram. We search for the ignition relay fuse. So that's the fuse that controls this relays, the ABS and other ones. That's ignition relay 2 and relay 1. That's the necessary relay we need. So let me see if I'll be able to identify. So this is how the diagram looks like. So this ignition relay, for now when you click on the accessory it works. So that means this side is working okay, we don't have issue. Our main problem is this. So as it is written beneath it, you can see they are telling you with smart key, that means that power will come from the IBU, which is the body control module. That's where that power is going to come from to activate this relay. And this relay is in the PCB block, the one that I showed you. So for the car to start, I need to activate these 2 relays. That's where I am now. I need to activate these 2 relays. So I have to find the wire that connects from this to this, because this is a PCB that I don't want to open it. Then that means I have to open the PCB. It's a solid state relay. These 2 relays are solid state relays. So if I have to replace them or even check them, I have to dismantle everything and desolder it, which I'm not going to do. So what I'm going to do is I have to test for wire integrity. I have to first check if the IBU is sending signal. Then I'll go and check at the end pin 11. That's pin 14 to see if that signal gets to its destination. If not, then I find another way of going around it and activate the relay and see if it will click and the ignition will turn on. So for now I'm going to test at the IBU, which is the body control unit, integrated body control unit. So I'm going to test it because I have access to it. So that's pin 8. Then I'll test this also for the IGN2 relay, for the ignition 2 relay, which is pin 9. So that means pin 9 and pin 8, I'm going to check them, and one is red and one is orange. So let's go using all data. So with this one I'm able to, let me go to, yeah, so I have the pin out. The reason why the other side, so this is how it looks like. The reason why there is no socket here is because the car is not using steering lock. The car is not using steering lock. So I'm going to check on this. That's D, connector D, and connector D on pin 8. So that means on pin 8 I'm having my output signal and my output signal also. So these two output signal goes to the relay to activate it. So pin 8 and pin 9 are my output signal. So with this which is red and orange, so now I have to go there and go and check on pin 8. So when I come back to this diagram, that means pin 8 is exactly going to be on this connector B and connector C. So connector D should be up. Yes, so this is connector D. So connector D, that means pin 8 is supposed to be around this side. So I'm going to test those two. So that means pin 8 connector D will be around this side, because when you check where the bricks are, so to be around that side. So I'm going to check for my red and orange and see if I'll get any output signal. If I get the output signal, then that means there could be a break. Then that means I have to test wire integrity and move to the next stage of the wiring diagram, and move to the next stage of my test and test it on the PVC to make sure it is not the PVC that has damaged, or the accident has affected the wire at a place that I have to check. So let's go and do that test. This is after so many hours of researching, and this is what I came up with. So let's go and do the test and verify our diagnosing. So from the research that we did, we are able to identify the two wires. So that's the red and orange. So I have to test from there and see if I turn on the ignition, will my test light turn on or not. Then I know what to do from there. So I'll plug my test light in there, then I'll bring you guys back. So now what I'm doing is, for my test, now I've connected it to this pin. I left my testing kits at home, so I was in a hurry to come and check the job, so I left it at home. So now let me turn the ignition on. Let me press it twice. This to turn accessory. Wow, could you believe that now the ignition is back on? Wow, when I connected it this way, now the ignition is turning on perfectly. Now the ignition is turning on. So sometimes some of the things, it needs some little energizer, then it turns on. So that's the reason why my test light is not turning on, because the amount of power that the relay needs to turn on is lesser than the test light turning on. So now the ignition is back on, and I can turn it off and turn it back on again. And now my ignition is back on because I tested it this way. So the light turned on and went off, and now the ignition is back on. So now what I'll do is, now that I've left it this way, let me try and turn it on, and you can see it's not turning on. Wow, it's not turning on. You can see it's not turning on. After I disconnected the test light, my ignition is not turning on. So it's either it needs a feed. You know, normally the relays, the relays has a core winding, so the ground side of the relay has to send signal, has to send winding to the unit before it turns the ignition on. So now that it is not turning on, let me, because my relay, my test light is serving as a ground, I have one leg on ground, and I've connected my test light to ground. So now my test light is completing the circuit. So the BCM is seeing it as a complete circuit, and I'm even surprised why it turns it on. So let me turn on my ignition again and see if So now when I turn it on, the ignition turns on, but the moment I take my power out, my ignition goes off. So now what I'll do is, let me go and do this same test at the engine bay and see if I'll get the same signal. I'll get the same thing. So to this, it tells me that my wiring integrity is okay. So it could be a ground issue somewhere, which I have to find. So now I have to check all the ground related to this vehicle, all the ground holding this vehicle, the IBU, the smart box itself. So you can see the ignition is not turning on, but the moment I do my connection, and now my ignition is on, that's why the light is on. So let me turn it off and turn it on again. Now the real ignition is on. So that tells me that it could be a ground somewhere or resistance somewhere. So what I'll do now is, let me go back to my wiring diagram, check all the grounds on the vehicle, scan the vehicle, and make sure I'm able to communicate with all the modules. When I disconnect this, it will go off. So I'm not going to disconnect it. I'll leave it like that. Then I'll see my next step. So now my ignition is on. Let me scan my vehicle and see if I'll be able to communicate with all the modules. So the moment I disconnect the test light, my ignition is going to go off, and I'm not going to do that. Now I want to be able to identify the actual problem, and I'm hoping I'll be able to communicate with the engine. So now I'll test ignition 2 also. So I'm still not able to communicate with the engine control module. So now I'm going to test the ignition 2 also. Then I'll see if that one also I'll get any luck with this. So now what I have to do is, I have to find why my IBU is behaving this way. Then from there I'll know the next thing to do. So let me carry on with my test. Now let's see what we are going to get. But for now, I'm able to communicate with most of the modules. So now I tested at this point, and the ignition 1 really turned on. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to test at this point and see the unit that will also turn on. So that means I have to test from here and see the other unit that will also turn on. Then from there I go to the 10th pin and test that one also, and see if this really, if this fuse will energize. Let me do that and bring you guys back. From my wiring diagram, it tells me that the ground is at the left front of engine compartment, but for now I'm not really checking that, because I'm having all the sensors, ignition 1 and ignition 2 on it. So now I am on ignition 2 also, which is the orange wire, and you can see the light turns on and goes off. So that means it's getting to its destination. So now what I want to do is, I'm going to check at that side also and see when I press the ignition, do I get those signals that I need. So with this one, I'll check for pin 14 and this, and press the ignition and see if my test light will turn on, because of this, because I've taken this out. So let me do this and see if my test light will turn on when I turn the ignition on. So with this one, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to test 11 and 5. 11 and 5 is the signal line. So there is 7. So there is 5. This is 5, so let me turn the ignition on and see if my test light will turn on. Yeah, so the test light turns on and it turns off. So that tells me that the wire integrity is okay. So now let me test the 11. The 11 is beneath the 5. So let me test the 11 also. Let me see. Yeah, it also turns on. So that tells me that the wire integrity to this point is okay. So now let me test for the ground also. Then I'll conclude if the problem is from here. But from the IBU to this point, the wire integrity is okay. So let me do that test and fix it back and see, and test the ground also and see if I have any issue. If not, we will replace this. Change my test light to power. So that means I should get ground. My test light should turn on at this point, and this 7. So if that's 7, then 13 should be beneath it. So let me go and check it and come and test, because my test light is not turning on, and that ground has to be constant. So if you can see, this is the 13. This is the 13. I've already tested the 11 and 5, so 13. And from here you can see 13 says ignition ACC relay ground. So let me test that one and make sure my ground is okay. To test and prove that my test lead is on ground, this is the ground of the ECU, and you can see this is the battery ground, and you can see my test light is on. So let me do it again and test and see if I'm lacking ground. Let me turn it on, and you can see I'm not having any ground. As I was saying, I'm not having any ground on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back probe it, then give it a ground, right? Then turn on the ignition and see if everything will work perfectly. If everything works perfectly, then that means I have to locate the ground and fix it. Then I'll call it a fix, because from this test it tells me that I'm lacking ground, because when I give it ground here, you can see my test light is turning on, even on the body is turning on, and it's turning on. So there is a ground here. Let me test it, and it's turning on. So on this pin 13, if my test light is not turning on, then that means I'm lacking ground. As I said first, it could be a ground issue. So let me give it a ground, which my test light will be able to handle that ground, so that it doesn't cause anything. So when the current is more than what the ECU need, my test light to rather turn on, so that it doesn't cause anything. So I'll do that test now and bring you guys back. That means I'm lacking ground from the relay, for the relay to activate. So let me do that and bring you guys back. So now what I've done is I've grounded the cable back and I've fixed the socket back. So now from here, let me turn it to this ground rather, and you can see the moment I turn my ignition on, my ignition turns on, my check engine is on, and everything is back. So that means I'm lacking ground. It's a ground issue. So that means I have to find for where this actual ground is. That's why the car ignition wasn't turning on. So I have to find for it and fix it. But for now, I should be able to communicate with every unit on this vehicle. So let me go back. Unless there is an issue with the unit, I can see the check engine light has gone off again. So let me try and do auto scan to communicate with it and see. So it is the ground that helps the relay to activate that's having the issue. So it looks like, so I have to identify the ground and then use the ground to fix the issue. Yeah, I'm not still able to communicate with these two units, so I'll deal with them later. But for now that everything is communicating and my lights turns on and turns off, you can see my check engine light comes on and go. That tells me that there's an issue with it. So now my ignition turns on and everything is back. So it's a ground issue, so I have to try and identify the location of the ground, then I'll know what to do. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more videos. So now after a while, now you can see I'm seeing the P parking and everything, and I'm able to communicate with transmission and engine. So I'll try and crank it, or let me go back and do a rescan again and see if I'll be able to communicate, because now the check engine light is solid on and the P is on. So this one has a different transmission board and a different engine board. So let me go and check why my engine is now no communication. It's now not communicating, so no response. So let me press the socket back on again, and for now it should be able to crank because the P is back. Okay, so let me do that and bring you guys back. So after a little search, I found out that the ground is located here. You can see there is a torn wire, so I'll remove it and repair the ground, then I'll fix everything and disconnect the ground that I did here, then see if the ignition will turn on successfully. So this is the ground, and two ground wires are torn. I don't know if due to the accident, so I'll join them together, then I'll remove my ground and test everything and see if everything is back. So now after fixing the ground, everything is back to life. So that was the ground causing the issue. So let me do my auto scan and see, because most of the ECU sensors were also on that ground. So let me see if I'll be able to. Yes, I'm able to scan with the ECU, and you can see everything is communicating, and I'll fix everything back to normal. So now, moment of truth, you can see I'm having a lot of fault code in the ECU, 11 fault code. I'll just erase most of them. Let me do quick erase, and let me see the remaining one. Now I'm having my P for the vehicle to start, and I'm having every needed thing apart from the steering for the vehicle to start. So moment of truth, I'll try and crank it. So now the ignition issue is dealt with. Yeah, and moment of truth, the vehicle is cranking. The vehicle is running perfectly. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more videos. Daddy. Okay, so now everything is perfect. The vehicle is running.